So thank you all for joining this morning's session on team coaching. As Sharon mentioned, the past and present and future of team coaching. I think following up with Richard Boyatzis, that's a tough act. But I confidently can say I think we have some of the best minds, thought leaders and practitioners in the area of team coaching on today in this session. So why don't we give a warm welcome to the panelists who are beaming in from all over the world. And we're really excited about this. The theme of this conference is on the future of coaching. And for those of us who are coming from a team coaching perspective, we see the future. And in our view, team coaching is one of the niche areas that's really emerging in the coaching field. That team coaching provides a context for individual coaching in organizations, and it's also the link up to the larger system. And so we see team coaching as not replacing one-on-one coaching or replacing systemic coaching, but being one of the main actors that links up these different levels in the coaching that we can do in organizations. And so we're really excited about that. We also think that the world, and we hear increasingly the use of the term VUCA, we're living in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world, and that requires increasing levels of collaboration, increasing levels of collective intelligence. We really have to lead from a collective perspective and act together collectively. And so teaming has become part of the currency through which organizations do work. Now it's interesting because organizations say that they value teaming and that teaming is the fundamental unit through which not only work happens, but organizations learn. Yet what we do to set teams up for success, there's a really big gap. So there's a big valuing of teams, yet we haven't really set teams up to the level of success possible. And this is where team coaching can fit in. Obviously, there's a long tradition of team intervention that was precursor to what we're using the term team coaching around. So whether that's team building or team facilitation, team training, team development. But we see with the maturation of the coaching field, bringing a coaching perspective to team intervention really has some unique benefits. So when I think about team coaching, I see it as a meta competency that brings coaching, a sustainable change to build off of Richard Boyatzis' work. Team coaching is a process of sustainable change that brings about a context of learning and ultimately performance, but that it draws on training, it draws on facilitation, it draws on consulting skills and brings a coaching lens to that. And that's what we think is unique about team coaching and has a lot of promise and potential. Some of the folks we have on the panel today have research that shows that team coaching can deliver anywhere from 10 to 40% or more increase in the performance of a team. And so it has an impact. Team coaching is not just the domain of professionals, externals, or professional internals. Team coaching is a function of a team that can be delivered by a team leader, by team members themselves. And so we're really thinking about team coaching in a broad way. Maybe the ultimate goal is for teams to become self-coaching teams, to be able to coach themselves and to develop a culture of teaming in an organization. So that's the vision we hold and the promise that we see around team coaching. So over the course of the last 2 years through my podcast, I've gotten to interview lots of experts in team coaching, and some of them are on the screen today. And so I thought, as we, in this conference, reflect on the future of team coaching, and we have a session today on team coaching, why not bring in some of the key pioneers, the key thought leaders in this field, to bring them into this conversation? And really, this is an acknowledgement to them, because many of them have been pioneering team coaching for up to 30 years, oftentimes alone without the help of an established field and community. And so we wanted this session to be one of recognition and acknowledgement for the contributions they've made and the pioneering work and leadership they've shown. It's also a chance to really dialogue about, if we want to understand the future of coaching and the future of team coaching, we need to understand where it's coming from, what are its origins, the past and what's in the present now, and what might be possible in the future. So that's really the spirit of this. We wanted to, recognize these leaders and also have a dialogue with you about what this future might look like in the area of team coaching. So the way this panel has been structured is just going to give some brief introductions to the panelists, and then we're going to get right into it. We have 3 questions that we're going to be having 20-minute open conversation with the panelists. The first one's going to be around the zeitgeist, about what motivated and inspired these folks to go into the team coaching arena. The second's going to be looking back on the field and their careers in this area. What have been some of the big key takeaways, lessons learned, insights or challenges when team coaching has worked or not? So we're going to have a session on that. And then the final question is really going to be more about what's possible moving forward. What are the challenges facing team coaching now? What are the opportunities? What might be possible? So we're going to do that. So we'll have 3 20-minute dialogue sessions. and then we're going to open it up to all of you for 15, 20 minutes of Q&A reactions, and then we'll wrap up the session. So thanks for joining in to today. So let's go ahead. I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Dr. Sandra Hayes. So I just want to give a little acknowledgement too. I started my master's degree in organizational psychology in 1998 here at Teachers College, and one of my first instructors was Dr. Sandra Hayes. And so a lot of who I've become is really a testimony to her teaching and her mentorship. We've become business partners. Many years later, I went on to do my PhD here at Columbia University in organizational psychology. So really delighted to have my colleague, Dr. Sandra Hayes, joining for moderating this panel today. I'll be passing the mic a bit to Sandra. So just to go through an introductions, we have in the upper left corner, David Clutterbuck joining us today. He's beaming in from Istanbul, usually based in the UK, but David is a real prolific writer. He's a partner, the founding partner of David Clutterbuck Partnership. He's associated with the European Council for Mentoring and Coaching. Prolific writer, he wrote a book called Coaching the Team at Work in 2007. He's published more than 60 books, hundreds if not thousands of articles, a really prolific person in the coaching, mentoring space. So it's a really honor and pleasure to have David joining us today. So welcome to you, David. We have also joining us Phil Sandhal in the upper right hand of the screen. Phil is the co-founder of Team Coaching International. Phil also is one of the co-authors of probably the most widely published and bought book on coaching, Coactive Coaching, Changing Business and Transforming Lives. And about 15 years ago, Phil started to move from one-on-one coaching into team coaching and has a really exciting book coming out next year called Teams Unleashed. So this really is going to distill a lot of his wisdom and knowledge around the area of team coaching. And so Phil's just a great thought leader and pioneer in the area. He's trained more than 1,000 team coaches around the world. They have some really great diagnostic instruments and great things going on at Team Coaching International. So big welcome to Phil, who's in the San Francisco Bay Area, joining us today. We have Marita Fridjhon, also hailing from San Francisco today. And Marita is the co-founder of CRR Global and the ORSC program, so the Organization and Relationship Systems Coaching program, which trains coaches in systemic coaching, including team coaching. She's the recent co-author of Creating Intelligent Teams, Leading with Relationship Systems Intelligence, and has been training team coaches and systemic coaches around the world for a long time. Also has some roots in early on as a leader in the coactive, in the CTI world. So welcome to you, Marita, and thanks for joining us. Not to be outdone, we have 4 more panelists here. We have Jennifer Britton, based in Toronto, Canada. Jennifer also is a thought leader in the area of group and team coaching, known for her book, From One to Many, Best Practices in Team and Group Coaching. She's been training group and team coaches through teleseminar, through online on phone call, through teleseminars, through webinars, face-to-face. She has a summer institute that she does up in Canada, and so is a credentialed trainer of group and team coaches, and another great, the one Gen X, I think, panelist, along with myself today, holding that up. We've had some fun about that in the past. So welcome to you, Jennifer. Great having you on. We have Ruth Wageman, Dr. Ruth Wageman, who is a director at Rethink Health, which is an initiative of the Ripple Foundation. She's an associate in the Department of Psychology at Harvard and one of the sort of most world-known established scholars on teams and thinking about teams. She has a great book called Senior Leadership Teams, What It Takes to Make Them Best. So there's a real focus on leadership teams. A lot of her research underlies a lot of what we quote as team coaches behind the team coaching field. She wrote an article in 2005 in the Academy of Manager Review called A Theory of Team Coaching, and so has really brought a lot of great research and hard evidence to really understanding what makes teams really work. And so really wonderful to have Ruth joining us today from New Hampshire. So welcome, Ruth. We have DJ Mitsch dialing in from Raleigh, North Carolina. DJ was the past president of the International Coaching Federation. She is the creator of the Healthcare Coaching Institute, which is focusing on transforming healthcare, training coaches in that area. She's also the creator of the Team Advantage Team Coach Training Program, and has a recent book just published called Zombies to Zealots, Reawakening the Human Spirit at Work. So it's really a pleasure to have DJ with us today. So welcome, DJ. Great having you joining. And not to be outdone here, last but not least, we have Professor Peter Hawkins. He's coming in from the Henley Business School. He's a professor of leadership at Henley Business School. Very well known for pioneering work in systemic team coaching. The Team Coaching Zone brought Peter to New York City in January for a 3-day systemic team coach certificate training program, which is outstanding. He has a wonderful book called Leadership Team Coaching, Developing Collective Transformational Leadership, and has trained team coaches all over the globe. So we have a super powerful cast of characters here joining us today. So let's give them a final round of applause and welcome. And I'm going to pass it over to Sandra Hayes to move us into the session.
Okay, so again, welcome everyone. I'm Sandra Hayes, and it is my distinct pleasure to have this opportunity to moderate this conversation with this very esteemed panel. So I'm going to jump right in with the question to get the conversation going. So panelists, please respond to this question. What was the impetus, or what was in the zeitgeist that compelled you to choose and contribute the way you have to team coaching? So what compelled you to do this work? And we can start with anyone.
This is Phil. I'll start.
Thank you, Phil.
So the impetus that led me to team coaching is actually my current business partner, Alexis Phillips. Back in 2004, I had spent about 6 or so years training coaches around the world. I had been in Japan for almost 2 years training coaches and the first trainers of coaches for CTI Japan. I moved back to the U.S. and into the Bay Area. I was looking for connection and building community with other coaches, and met Alexis, and she had been working at that point for about 3 years to create an assessment tool that would create a picture of the team as a whole rather than a number of individual performers. Her background, she actually took the training that Marita and Marita's partner created around relationship systems, and was excited to be working with teams and wanted an assessment tool from a systems point of view. And when she couldn't find one, she created it. Well, I saw that in 2004 after 6 or 8 years of individual coach training, and that was my wow moment. I saw the possibility of actually taking the impact of coaching into an organization, into a team, and having this leverage of using the competencies and skills with a whole group of people all at one time. It was like, wow, this is fabulous. And so it really opened the door for me to see how team coaching could take what I already knew about coaching and really transform the way people work and work together. And in many cases, individuals who might not ever hire an individual coach could have the benefit of the coaching approach.
Okay.
I'm going to jump in after Phil. This is Marita Fridjhon. For me, I'm going to take it back a tiny bit. I was born and raised in South Africa during the apartheid era. And I think one of the things that struck me there was the impotence that we as individual activists felt in trying to create change around apartheid. So very early on, it became very clear to me that unless we can have a systemic approach and bring change about in a broader sense that can collaborate with the individual effort, change is very difficult to affect. So I think that my roots in that experience that was very, very painful is part of what led me to really begin to examine systemic work that then really found its feet in the coaching industry, where for me the focus really is it's not either or, but for some of us the most effective way is to go from the individual or the single to the collective whole, and then bring skills and tools to bear on that. That's a different kind of change from what we can affect as individual coaches, and that's what excites me.
That's a great story, Marita. Thank you for sharing that. I'm really intrigued by the emphasis on systems that's coming out of all of our observations, because I actually got into studying coaching by accident. I went out, way back when I was doing my dissertation on self-managing teams at Xerox. I was interested in the question of how people could make the transition from autonomy to interdependence in organizations. And many places were launching self-managing teams at the time. And a lot of the zeitgeist when I started studying teams in organizations was the notion that there was a lot of resistance to teams, that in particular frontline managers resisted the notion of giving up control to their teams, and they really needed to make the transition from directive leadership to a more coaching style of leadership. And very quickly what I came to see was that it wasn't a matter of individuals resisting change. It was that the systems that had been that were in place before were still in place. And so the teams didn't have real team tasks to do. They didn't have a compelling collective purpose. They were not being rewarded for team performance excellence. And so what many of these frontline leaders needed was they themselves needed coaching, and the teams needed development and thinking about how to exercise influence on the conditions under which they were actually working. And when they developed their capacity to recognize what obstacles were getting in their way and sort of how to redesign the conditions under which they were working, they were able to accomplish great things together. And that sort of led me to start thinking about, so how can we define the notion of what team coaching really is and how it can develop human capacity to work together collectively.
So perhaps I could build on what you just said, Ruth, because appropriately I'm here at Henley Business School, and we've just had a day with about 40 frontline and more senior team leaders looking at how they coach their own teams. And I think my wake-up moment was when I was a team leader, and this is going back 1970s. I had a great team of individuals, and I was coaching each of them, my team members, and they were all brilliant at their own function. But what I started to realize is the responsibility for the whole being more than the sum of the parts was somehow being delegated up to me as the team leader. And I thought, now there's something wrong here. And my second wake-up moment is so parallel to yours, Ruth, because I was still, I'd done training as a psychotherapist. I'd been working in mental health. I'd worked with group dynamics at the Tavistock. And I had this great belief that if we only got everyone relating well together, the team somehow would become high-performing. And I discovered that wasn't the case. That my job was to learn, how did I bring not the solutions to the team, but the challenges to the team, and get the team to work on what was it we had to do collectively that we couldn't do by working in parallel. And it was that overarching purpose that suddenly drove us to relating better, if that makes sense.
And also,
yeah, I love that, Peter, and I'm going to build off that if I can. I had a background in broadcast. I was a broadcast manager for about 2 decades, and one of the challenges that I had was to build out rebuild a network system for sports in one of the broadcast companies. So I managed a lot of high-performing teams that supported Mike Krzyzewski of Duke University and Terry Holland of UVA at the time, and Jim Balvano at NC State. And so I loved being in the arena of sports. And in fact, the word coaching actually comes out of sports, as you all know. And we've had some interesting translations of that in places like Brazil and other places where it means different things. But it really came out of the discipline, where teams have goals, they have functions, they have timelines, they have sort of all the pressures in business that they have in sports. And what I saw is there wasn't a real clear way of winning. So after I became a coach in 1993, I started working with a team, a broadcast team that I had led. They called me back and said, boss, we need you to come in and help us figure out strategy. That's your strength, and we're missing you. And so I went back in and I sat down with them, and we started looking at what they were up to. And I said, okay, let's shake this up a little bit. You're playing this game the way we always have, and it is a game. And what would happen if everybody told the truth you're sitting on right now? And so they started going through a list of things that they would change automatically. And one of those was, well, we'd get a piece of equipment delivered that's been back ordered, and they went through the whole list of things that would change the face of their business. And I said, then I'm going to coach you for 4 months. And we're going to put the system in place that will have you realize wins every day. And we're going to enroll all the stakeholders. And so we actually assigned points because, we figured we'd adopt everything from sports. And the bottom line is, at the end of that 4 months, they had accomplished everything they set out to do, and then some. They brought $2 million to the bottom line that they didn't expect. And he looked at the guy who hired me, he looked at me and said, oh, this is extraordinary. You should call this the extraordinary game. And so I did, and they hired me to do 6 more. And what I saw is, as a coach coming from the outside, I was really bumping up against some things, particularly in week 3 or 4 of the coaching around the execution of the game plan, that had me be the bad guy. And so I went to school on the organizational design piece of it, and I realized we were bumping into storming, into conflict, and we didn't have language for it, but we needed to normalize that. And we needed to celebrate that, and we needed to bring people together to accelerate through those phases. So what Dr. Bruce Tuckman researched in the late 60s and 70s around teams and how long it takes them to form and then storm or, engage each other really and then move through into performance, we were seeing happen sometimes in 3 to 4 weeks, and it was like, whoa. So we codified the process, and then we've been training people. We've trained 300 people around the world, and most of those inside organizations, because I have a philosophy that the best coaching teaches people to coach themselves, particularly leaders. So it conveys skills just in time. So while I have a school, I really like to focus on what the team leader is seeing, the support they need, and having them get great with their people. So that was my zeitgeist.
I'm going to jump in. So it's Jennifer Britton, and like DJ said, Peter said, I really came in through the roots and the entry point of being a team leader. My own background was within the international sector. I worked for the United Nations, similar to Marita, who was actually one of my original individual coach trainers, very involved throughout the late 80s, early 90s as an experiential educator, as an educator of social change in my work. And as I found and stumbled across coaching in the early 2000s as a leader within the UN, my constant question was, how do we expand this lens? How do we expand the conversation to communities, to the activists on the ground? How do we bring it into governments to start changing the types of questions that are being asked and the types of conversations that are being had? So now today, I no longer work only in the international realm. I do a lot of work virtually. I think that's a whole added layer. How do we bring people from across the globe together to create common experience? Similar to what we're doing today. It's a different world that we operate within. But I think the value of team coaching, for many of us, as we'll see today, it's creating these pause points. How do we bring people together, have the pause, using tools like Phil's and many others that have been developed? How do we really give teams a new language and a new framework so that they can work across these differences in a much safer way? So again, it's fascinating. And I guess, David, it's over to you. And I was intrigued with your book as a coach practitioner myself. So an honor to have you as well.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, I've been involved, it seems an awful long time, with coaching and mentoring since the very early 1980s. And one of the things I learned quite early on was that you can't coach the individual without addressing the system that they're part of. And the biggest part of the system has to be the team that they're part of, or the most immediate part of the system. So that has always given me some interest in the dynamics of teams and how they influence the individuals within them, and vice versa. And then I did a lot of work with teams and particularly top teams with the National School of Government in the UK. And we set up a Stepping Up to the Board program, and we particularly developed some processes for observing and looking at the quality of conversations that happened around top teams and boards. And that's why I realized there was a big difference between dialogue and dialogue, which spelled with a D-I-R-E, because most of the conversations were absolutely ghastly. And we realized that, the top teams or board, while top teams might be a team, boards can very rarely be a team simply because there's so many things that get in the way. And then about 20 years ago, I was commissioned to do some research by the European Commission into how teams manage their learning. And what I was trying to find out was the research question was really, what's the difference between, or what made some teams much more effective at managing the learning process than others? And we came up with quite a few conclusions around this. We didn't really come away with many conclusions about performance. We didn't make that link clearly. But what we did realize was that all teams are not the same, that every team has or there are different kinds of teams with different kinds of learning dynamics. And that introduced me eventually to Lee Thompson's book, which I think is a brilliant book called Making the Team. And I strongly recommend anybody to read that who's interested in teams. Then, of course, the work of Richard Hackman and Ruth and others have all added big contributions to this. But for me, I learned by writing. And so when I sat down to write the book that came out in 2007, my big question really there was, what exactly is team coaching and what do team coaches do? I'm still waiting to try and work out the answer. I'm part of the way there.
Great. So thank you, David. So one of the comments in the chat, I'm going to ask you all to respond to. Ruth says, it's interesting to hear that we all have been exploring the interplay of different levels, coaching individuals, including team leaders, coaching teams as a whole, and developing individual and group capacity to influence systems, and our collective attraction to developing the capacities of activists. Any comments or additional thoughts on that?
I'm going to jump in there because I think that there is the constant interplay between the individual, the group, the system. So we often talk that our focus in training and our focus in working with teams is about how do we shift from me, which is emotional intelligence, to we, which is the social intelligence, to it. And the it really is the larger whole, the collective. There's a constant dance between, am I working on me? Are we working on we? And what is it that the it or the system itself or the team itself wants and can provide us with? That's a whole different set of information. So the shift from me to we to it, or from ego to eco, I think that's the dance. That's a constant dance that I think all of us play with.
Great.
And just to build on to what you said, Marita, again, in my work with group and team coaching, they're different disciplines. We're sub-disciplines, yet there is so much overweaving. And so in writing my second book, From One to Many, it was really like, what does this look like and sound like, just in point to David, in the different iterations of where and how our work can take us. So very much, I appreciate, Ruth, what you've written there in terms of this interplay. It's a constant interplay. And I think as practitioners, we always want to look at what is that interplay of different models and tools and approaches in service to whatever entity or whatever organization, team, or group is in front of us, is with us. And that will impact our approaches, our stance, and the entire conversation.
I think there's a 3 or even a 4-cornered model here or approach here. You've got the individual, you've got the team, you've got the leader, and you've got the interventionist from outside. And all 4 of them have an influence, a dynamic, which we can't really map at this stage. I'm currently doing some work with Facebook looking at their high-performing teams. And one of the things we found there is that the team leader plays a really important, much more important role than I had given credence to. And so there's something here about how do we actually enable teams to create a coaching culture within themselves. And the leader is an important part of that, but equally, so are the individual members of the team, and so is the context of the team. So we're dealing with a very, we're back to systems. We have a very, we can only address the system by looking at all its component parts and helping them to be integrated and to work together.
There's one piece that I want to add to that. I love what you're saying. And that is, for us, we hold leadership, for example, as a role that belongs to the system. And anybody at any given moment in time can have the answers or the insight to what is busy happening at the moment. I'm not talking about that CEO necessarily is a role that belongs to everybody, but the moments of leaderships, the moments of wisdom, the moments of eldership, that kind of leadership is actually a role that belongs to the entire system. And anybody can at any given moment in time step into that very effectively. And that's a very different way for leaders to begin to negotiate teaming.
So we're going to stop.
Yeah, and I love, it's DJ, I love,
DJ?
David, the path of integration.
DJ?
And I think, we're looking at that right through the lens of neuroscience and probably a lot of what you all experienced this morning. But, this really is a path of integration, not just for the team, but the individuals in the team, from the head, the heart, the space, and into the instincts. And it's like, we are picking up each other's vibes all the time. There's an energy in the space between, and getting people to really look at how to move, in sync with each other, in concert, and to listen to the team voice as one voice, just like they listen to individuals. Teaching them to do that, I think, is a critical piece of playing with this, right, of what we're learning as we go along as practitioners as well. But I love the notion of integration, and would love to hear what others have to say about that.
So we're going to stop this portion.
To add, Sandhal, a fifth dimension, if you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you, Peter.
And that is, I think, besides the team members, the team, we as the team leader, the interventionist, there's also the team stakeholders. And I think part of the important bit of the development of team coaching is to actually coach the team, not just when they're in their away days or in their team meetings, but how the team is engaging all their critical stakeholders. That's the people who report to them, their suppliers, their customers, their investors, the communities where they operate. I think more and more, the big challenges for organizations is not managing my people, my team, but how do I orchestrate the business ecosystem?
That's right.
Of partnering bits of that system.
That's right.
So you can have a team which has great meetings and all gets on well together and it's got a great collective purpose. But if we're not also working with their stakeholder interfaces, we're not making the contribution that we could be.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, thank you. We're going to stop this portion of it, and we're going to give those of you here just a minute to reflect on what stood out for you when you heard, when you listened to this conversation. Just 1 minute about what stood out for you before we move to the second question.
Just solo reflection, individual reflection, yeah. So for the panelists, just tee up for you the next question that's coming up. So, obviously you've been working with teams over the course of your careers in research and in practice. And so what we want to do is sort of really step back and look at some of the big lessons learned. And I think you've started to move the conversation there already, David's comment about team leaders. If there's one thing that comes up in my podcast around when team coaching tends to fall apart, 9 times out of 10, team leaders are there. So I think one of the big lessons is really around the role of the team leader. Peter here brought the conversation into the team in its context and relationship to stakeholders. So in this next question, which we can now start to move into, as you look back and step back, if you had to distill down some of the key learnings or insights that you've taken out of team coaching, lessons learned that we can pass on to today's audience, what really comes to your mind? So let's riff on that a little bit. And I don't know which one of you'd like to kick it off, but it seems like we're already moving there naturally. So,
Krista, with your permission, I'd like to start on that one because I think probably the most powerful lesson that I've learned, whether it's working with the team as a whole or working with the team leader, it's teach people how to pay exquisite attention to beginnings. Teams are complex systems, and you can't make them be effective, but what you can do is put in place a set of healthy conditions that increase the chances that they will get on a positive trajectory. And that's what puts them in the powerful position to chart their own course once you get them off to a good start in a very sort of self-managing and self-coaching kind of way. And I've been finding that to be particularly crucial in working with I was intrigued by the other thread that a bunch of us have worked with activists who very often are not working in an organization or within a single institutional authority structure. They've got to figure out how to organize themselves in order to accomplish great things. And developing people's collective capacity to get themselves off to a good start turns out to be one of the major lessons that I've seen in really trying to be helpful to people.
Great. Thank you, Ruth.
This is Jen, and like you said, it's, people and our brains remember the start and the end of things. So Krista used this language, how do we set people up for success, whether it be the team leader, and that's where I continue to spend a lot of time outside of the coaching relationship. I think too, as organizational contexts continue to change and become more global, how do we also adjust and adapt our coaching approaches? Not only in the tools, but in the ways that we're coaching, in the ways that we're helping to stimulate the conversation. So I've also really been enjoying this whole conversation in the last few minutes about, the real time, the culture change. Earlier this week here in Toronto, we had our annual ICF Toronto meeting. Our conference, and that idea of how do we continue to adapt the conversation, I think is so critical in today's world. So it's not just about us as coaches adapting it, but it's also about getting the team to think about how do they adapt and disrupt some of their systems and ways and approaches. And just as we've heard, the team, there's the danger that the team is going to be so insular without connecting into that ecosystem. So part of our work is also, I think, in the longer term, and this is about phasing team coaching, the immediate work may be helping that team really become more gelled and more proficient as a team, but in the medium and longer term, helping them really understand, the bigger impact. So practically in some of my work, some of it becomes even more embedded coaching. And actually next week, I'm off to 4 days with a team, and it's real embeddedness with their stakeholders as well. That's very different than a traditional external coach coming in, doing it on site. It's completely off-site work. So that may spark a couple of other comments here as well.
Yeah, Jennifer, it's DJ, and I love that because I think as team coaches, we are all in with the team. It's not just the supporting the leader. We have to be really paying attention to the whole. And we also need to, you've talked about systems as if everybody out there in the audience knows exactly what we mean. And I'm not sure when I talk about systems that people do. So I've kind of adopted Michael Gerber's E-Myth to look at organizations and the phases that they go through, from creation to concentration to momentum to maturity and innovation. And it's like when you look, and there's a lot of other models around that, but when you look at where an organization is, just came back from working this first of this week with an upstart kombucha company on the West Coast, and all millennials, amazing product, and watching where they are really in creation and looking at their bandwidth around that, looking how they're being with each other. It's like two things I see, going back to Sandra's question, and one of them is where are their agreements, how are they chartering with each other about really who does what as they grow and go up to the next level, which is like rapid fire. They're growing about 400% a year. And then the other one is in supporting the team leader, they're already in over their head from experience. They're in uncharted waters. They're reporting to boards, and they're 33 years old, and they're reporting to boards. Many of those board members are investors. And so when you start helping them build bridges, part of it is, how do they stay in the space of managing what they've got to manage day to day, but also looking at how do they build bridges with the seniors, the elders who are there to advise them without losing their power. So, I think there is a lot in the dynamics that we need to look at, but I think we also need to give language to the system.
Yeah. So perhaps I could build on that and link DJ and link it back to what Jennifer said about bringing the stakeholders in. Because I think there's two things that I try and bring to team coaching, and that is how do I help the team think both future back and outside in? And the future back is I'll ask questions like, you as a team, what might you regret in 2 years' time not having addressed today? Mm-hmm. What's going to hit you as a surprise in 3 years' time that you already half know? So how do we bring, because they get so swallowed up in today's urgent issues, the ability to grow their ability to anticipate, not just respond to future challenge, but to anticipate them is critical. The second thing is, how do we get the stakeholders' voice into the room? Either through role play or through literally getting the stakeholders to come to the team offsites, which is why I like what you said, Jennifer. I think those two are really important elements that they accelerate the learning and the development of the team.
What you're talking, go ahead, Jennifer.
I just want to also clarify, you don't even have to go to the offsite. There may be moments in the year where the team is out with their stakeholders naturally. So how can we fit in and create those just-in-time, real-time moments? So over to you, Marita.
I think that one of the things that we're looking at is how do we operationalize some of these concepts? So one of the things that we often do is an activity that we call lands work, where we literally are requesting the team or whoever the nested system is that we're working with to not only occupy their own land, whether it's the land of accounting but to occupy the land and literally step into the land of the stakeholder. What are the challenges there? What are the things that the stakeholders are excited about? What is it that they want us to know? There is there's a rehearsing into that does bring us some information. So that's one of the places. And I think one of the other things is, the question really was, where are the places that it felt like we failed or we missed something? So if I look at one of the places that we missed something, that if I look back at places where we could have done it better, it's because we assumed that we know what's going on, or that the system assumed that it knows what's going on. We did not ask the question, what's trying to happen? We so often look at who's doing what to whom, or what is the information we have. From the perspective of systemic emergence, there is something trying to happen. And that's a very different perspective, which is close. I think, Peter, I can't remember, I think it was you that talked about the future thinking. And there's a different place. That is, when I begin to consider what's emerging, what's trying to happen. That often takes us to the complex, which is more difficult to navigate than the complicated. If I think I know what it is, that's complicated. But what's trying to happen is a whole different conversation.
This is Phil. Just a couple of quick things. My learning, making the move into team coaching, and one of the first was, and I put it in the chat, team coaching is actually a multidisciplinary event. When I first started working with teams, I'd been training individual coaches for years. I'd written a book on individual coaching. I was a really good individual coach, and my first time in front of a team, I was asking really great, provocative, powerful, open-ended questions. And after a while, you get sort of this glazed expression on the part of the team. One of our graduates actually had the experience of coaching a C-level team, being a really good, pure coach, and at one point the CEO got half out of his chair and said, if you ask me one more effing open-ended question, I'm going to fire your ass. And it was a learning moment for him, and in the telling of the story for me as well. The team doesn't care. They want to see results. If that means there are times when I'm a consultant with the team, or I'm facilitating a group process, or I'm training the team, all of those are for the benefit of the team. And I don't, this notion of I have to know what hat I'm wearing, well, maybe I do, but the team doesn't. What they want is to see results. And if I've got contributions that are clearly important or valuable based on my experience, it would be just wrong to withhold that.
Mm-hmm. I think we're temporary members of those teams. When we go in and really partner with people, which is the foundation for coaching, is that we become all in, part of what they're up to, right?
Well, and along those lines, we've mentioned this a little bit. I see my role as a team coach as working myself out of a job.
Mm-hmm.
That the greatest value I can give to the team is they learn how to talk to each other in ways that they didn't know before. That part of the gift that we bring as team coaches is we are listening way deeper and broader than just the content of the conversation, the positions that team members have on this issue or that issue. And if we can help the team members learn how to talk to each other in new ways, we've really done the work of team coaching.
Yeah, I can echo that. It's part of the contract that I make with every team. That at the beginning is my role is to make myself obsolete. I want you to have to develop the skills to be able to do this yourself. I think for me, the big lesson has come both in one-to-one coaching and in team coaching has been always to question the assumptions. We seem to have a theme here about assumptions going through. I'm finding more and more that when we start to actually look at the assumptions that we make versus the actual practice and the evidence, we start to see big holes. In one-to-one coaching, we've seen a lot of work around goals and the very simplistic assumptions people make about the use of goals in coaching, and we're beginning to see the same thing. Team goals, what are the assumptions we make about what goals are and what they look like and how you manage them, are not necessarily evident but borne out by the evidence. Things like, take like Patrick Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions. Great stuff, very, very useful. But where's the evidence base for it? I ask, and increasingly we're not sure. Yeah, are these actually the primary dysfunctions of teams, or are they just observations that may or may not be true for every team? And one that's recently been rammed home for me as a strong lesson is I always accepted all the theoretical work on social loafing that says you can't have a team really above more than 8 people because then it becomes too big to be functional. Now, in some of the research we're doing at the moment, we're seeing teams of 60 people who are high performing. And the mechanisms by which they make that we don't have the time to go into all those, but they're quite remarkable. So in the context of the team, the systems, the dynamics within that team seem to overturn the basic assumptions of social loafing theory. So for me, I think it's a role of team coaches to constantly question both their own practice and the theoretical base that we're working to.
Great. So you guys are just doing a great job as a self-managing panelist team here. Every time I feel like I need to jump in to make sure somebody's voice comes in, you guys just are sensing it. So I think this idea of what's needing to emerge, you guys are in the zone. So we have probably time for maybe one or two more responses to this topic before we're going to start to transition to our third question. So anything else anybody want to say to button up this conversation around lessons learned as you step back and look at what you've been learning over the last couple of decades about team coaching?
I will, Mr. DJ, and one of the things is actually relevant to the community that you have in your audience, because I worked with Terrence Maltbia on the group and team coaching distinctions and dynamic. I think that's still being taught there. And I know that Jennifer brought that through again, is that there's some confusion, particularly around some practitioners even in the coaching field, around what it means to coach teams and how that's different. And one of the things that we're seeing, and this goes back to what David was talking about, is that basically we're looking at teams and how they come together in a very different way. They're matrix teams, they're short-term teams. There are very few teams, other than entrepreneurial family-owned companies that we work with, that are in it for the long haul. So there's a temporariness of what teams are. And I think getting the distinctions around group and team as we go forward is going to be one of the really critical pieces for us to all understand.
Thank you, DJ. Phil, I think you were trying to jump in earlier, so.
Just picking up a little bit on what David was saying. I think it's interesting as a team coach that the conversation around goals is actually more interesting than the outcome of the goals conversation. That my awareness as a team coach when teams are doing that process is to see how do they interact with each other, how do they listen or not listen, what are the roles, formal and informal, that are showing up, what are the patterns in the way they make decisions. All of that is sort of underneath the conversation at the top, which is about setting goals. So that seems to be for me, the more interesting and more fun part, and ultimately, I think, more valuable.
Great.
I totally agree.
I was also to come back to you, DJ, because I think there's a third group of teams where the team is not in it for the long term, but the members are temporary.
Yeah.
The members come and go, but the team lives on.
I think it's one of the reasons why we put such an emphasis on systems, because if you look at it from the systems perspective, and a very simple definition of systems, a very simple definition is a group of interdependent players around a common purpose of goal or goals. So if you begin to look from that perspective, like everything is systemic. So sometimes I think that when we talk about team coaching and we can get confused or involved in the, what do we call it? Every now and again, I want to lift the gaze and go within the team coaching, group coaching, there is something that feels like it is overarching, that there is a system.
So like the team has a life which is more than the individuals. So many years ago, we used to think that teams, executive teams, would go away and create the new mission and vision. And I now sometimes say, no, actually, we can think the other way around. It's the challenge that creates the team, not the team that creates the mission.
Yeah.
The challenge is already out there in the world, waiting for a team to respond.
Sure, and then developing their capacity to recognize when it's time for transition and how to manage transitions when the purpose of their mission would be better served by a different configuration of individuals and different action.
Well, if you just look at what happens on this call here or in this presentation, we can say that there's the team that is us in presenting. We can say there's the panel holding team, and the two teams are interdependent. So what we do and how we work together also depends on how well Krista and them are doing the work. And so there's always more than one team and more than one system. And I think one of the things that is a challenge for us as team coaches is that we can often think only of the team we're coaching. And then we are in the same dilemma that Phil or somebody talked about. The team we coach go back to the bigger system and interact with the bigger system. The team we coach is not in isolation. So how do we hold the interdependence of teams within the organizational environment or organizational system?
And we also have the team of the people who are at the conference.
I've got
a team of people behind me who have been here all day, who are team leaders. And so our dialogue is being co-created by the audience.
Right.
So I'm interested to know, Sandra and Krista, is there any questions coming out of the audience?
We're going to have a time for that. It actually...
And move our team on to the next level.
Yeah, well, we're actually just getting ready to let the audience have a moment of reflection before we move to the final question, which is going to be around the future of team coaching. So let's take a minute of just individual reflection, and after the next round of dialogue, we're going to actually have a chance for some Q&A and interaction with the panelists. So let's just take a moment, and then Sandra's going to take us into the third discussion topic.
Okay, so this next question is about the present and the future of team coaching. So it's the question is, what do we see as the challenges and the opportunities for team coaching as an emerging discipline within the broader scope of coaching?
Maybe I'll come in first on that one, if I may. I can see. I've jotted down a whole bunch of different challenges which I see frequently. One of them is just what is team coaching in the sense that, is it part of normal coaching, of the general coaching scene? Is it a separate but related discipline? I think all the professional bodies in the field are struggling with that one. Obviously, when you look at all the expertise that's needed or the additional expertise that's needed to coach teams rather than to coach individuals, that would take you in towards the second. But then, how do you separate out team coaching from consultancy or team building? So at some point, I think we need to find a natural home for team coaching. And I'm not sure we're there yet. Another issue, which obviously is clearly a number of us are involved with, is how do you really equip one-to-one coaches to become really competent team coaches? We're not even sure what the competencies of team coaches are, and there may be different patterns or different models of competencies. What we do know is that if there's a big difference between being a sports coach and being a business coach, coaching in the business arena, for example. But again, what is that? Are there generic competencies here? I think that's an interesting question we don't have the answer to. Another issue is, can we make it affordable for everybody? Mostly it's for top teams, but how do we make it so that any team, even at a very small level, junior level in organization, can actually have team coaching? Do they have to do it themselves? How do we enable organizations to do this? Then how do we supervise people? Or team coaches. Who's doing the supervision? We were just doing a survey of Alison Hodge and I of team coach supervision, and we should be launching this we're piloting it at the moment. And what we want to understand is, what are the kind of conversations that team coaches have with their supervisors? Are there special skills that the supervisors need in order to be able to work with team coaches as opposed to one-to-one coaches? Don't know. We've got a lot to learn there. And the other thing I think is I get concerned about formulaic, or what I would call formulaic approaches to coaching, and I think we're seeing that coming into team coaching. If you have a rigid framework and say, this is how we do team coaches, we come in and we do this, and then we give this particular diagnostic, and then we do that. I think this is quite damaging and a real blind alley, but it does seem to be happening. So I think we as team coaches really need to value and respect and work with the individuality of teams, not try and think that they're all the same. That's a danger that I think that's on the horizon.
And this is Jen, and I'll just jump in because I often am, as a practitioner, saying there's no one model that's going to fit everything. We need a blend of approaches, and that's been one of the things that's come through the text box. I think, like anything in coaching, sustainability. What are the sustainable results and impact of our work, especially in an environment which is virtual, global, teaming? How does that get measured? Again, a nice thing though about systems is the team members may change, but the system, the culture is retained. So how do we also make that linkage a little bit more clear if it's not clear enough already? I think, again, another trend, and I've been happy to see this since I, like many others, interplay between groups and teams, there is this constant overweave. And so how, as coaches, are we aware of that in terms of what it means practically and in design and co-creation with our client base? So I'll just offer those up as a couple of the trends and themes I'm currently seeing: sustainability, and again, this constant interweave amongst approaches, subdisciplines, etc.
Totally agree with all of that. I think one of the challenges that we see, and actually the cohort that is waiting for me, that I'm absent from at the moment, and we'll go to them when we finished here, is within a company where we've now been, over a period of 4-5 years, trained 4 or 5 cohorts in a systemic model. There's been a complete culture shift over the 4 years. The question, the places that we're looking at is, so we are team coaches. There's been a culture shift occurring. How do we become obsolete? How do we, and it's some of the things, David, I think I heard you say, how do we equip the changing culture to actually retain and be a coaching culture? Is there supervision? Is there, there's a whole piece that we are busy figuring out as team trainers and team coaches. How do we become obsolete? How do indeed the organization begins to carry that? And from time to time, they will use externals. We know that will happen. So I think those are the challenges that we are looking at, and the opportunities.
Yes, I wanted to highlight that. So let's please do say something about the opportunities. Yes, go ahead, Peter.
Sorry?
I was just, Marita talked about the challenges and opportunities, and I just wanted to remind the panel that we're also talking about the opportunities in team coaching.
Right.
So I was going to come in on that, Sandra, and say that as we become, the more we can hand over the coaching of the teams, I think the new horizon is in two areas. I think it's in inter-team coaching and how we coach the spaces between teams. And I'm also currently doing some global research through Henley Business School on tomorrow's leadership. We've been interviewing CEOs, millennial leaders, and HR directors about how will leadership change in the next 20 years. And one of the strongest themes that they're telling us is that they reckon they'll be employing less and less people, these big organizations, in the next 20 years. But several of them said the number of people we will have to partner with across our business ecosystem in order to succeed is getting greater and more complex. And part of the new horizon that I think we have to move towards is how do we coach partnerships across business systems, not just across organizations.
Yes.
I think that's such fertile and needed ground that the more we can make our self obsolete in the team space, the more that's waiting for us.
It's that hollowing out of organizations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the hollowing out of the vertical and the spread of the horizontal.
Yes, yes.
Any other thoughts on this question?
Well, every team leader, every team has a team leader, unless it's a matrix team and then the leader changes and shifts. So wherever we coach individual executives, we have the opportunity to coach teams and to embed coaching skills in a coaching culture. So I would just say to your audience, if you're out coaching one-on-one or you're coaching executives, to look to see what's in the conversation and how do you get that individual team leader to see the magnificence and the potential and unleash it.
Right.
And also, how do you supervise the individual team leader on their delivery of team coaching? Okay,
so this is where Peter and I have fisticuffs sometimes for the audience, because supervision is a loaded word in some cultures. It is in the U.S. because mentoring means that the coach is seeking out someone, and supervision is being embedded in the conversation for coaching around the globe. And there will be an adoption of the process of it. What it's called, I'm not sure yet. but the notion of supervision, of having a team leader lean into a coach to have them look at the whole, and embedding capabilities for for hopefully change agents and coaches inside organizations where their responsibility is to really drive this process or these processes.
Yes.
I think that's going to be the thing where they're going to reach out to experts, or those of us who are still studying, who profess to be experts. They're going to reach out and they're going to need help to grow that. And so that's a system within this conversation and some language distinctions that I think we can continue to play with.
I want to raise a couple of different opportunities. I was really struck when I asked the question earlier who people's main influences are. The incredible interdisciplinarity of the intellectual origins of what it is that we're talking about. And I want to, first of all, I want to take that seriously and acknowledge that there is a tremendous amount of work to draw on that is relevant to the work of team coaching and that can develop our capacities to be increasingly effective as coaches, and to acknowledge at the same time. I've been spending some time with the the scholars of the science of team science. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but these are people who are studying the question of how do we create interdisciplinary science, because many of the complex problems we're trying to solve can't be solved by looking at just the perspectives of a single discipline alone. And as a consequence, you have to bring people together across disciplines in order to actually accomplish great problem solving and to make real progress in the sciences. And it is the case that there are limits to individual human capacities. We can't all study all of these different disciplines and become experts in all of them. So my question is there an opportunity for developing collaborations around team coaching and developing coaching teams who are more effective together than any one individual could be alone? And how much more should that become part of our coaching practice? I see that exploration as a big opportunity. The other one I want to raise is, I spent a lot of my life still embedded in the world of scholarship, of people who are in the basic disciplines just studying the question of what makes for an effective team. And there's a tremendous explosion of understanding of how the complexities of instability of membership and shifting levels of interdependence and lack of co-location and all of these different modern problems influence teams and their effectiveness. And I see very little dialogue between the world of practice and intervention in trying to improve the effectiveness of teams and the scholars who are studying the basic knowledge. And I think there too is a ripe opportunity for considerably greater collaboration and intercourse than we have created yet. And I'm very excited about both of those.
Thank you so much, Ruth. We'll have time for maybe one more comment. And Phil, would you like to weigh in on this question?
Sure. In terms of opportunities, fundamentally, it's my belief that human beings are wired to be in community. And they're not very good at it. And that what team coaching does is it provides an opportunity to engage a very small microcosm community in learning how they talk to each other, how they create safety with each other, how they problem solve together. And the team is almost the ideal microcosm for that kind of experience and training and changed behavior. So for me, the big picture is what we're doing with one team at a time is having an effect that I think is transformative, not only within the culture of that team and within that organization, but I think we're influencing how people learn how to talk to each other. And I think that, for me, is the big vision hope of the work that we're doing with teams.
Great. So we have reached the point where we really want to open up this conversation to the audience here and really acknowledge the larger system that we're a part of for this panel. So I want to thank all the panelists for really getting this rich conversation going. And we had these 3 topics, but we wanted to let it emerge, what was wanting to emerge on each of these conversations. So our panelists didn't come with pre-cooked thoughts, but really just together this content has emerged, and it's been really wonderful. But we want to get into dialogue with you. And so Himanshu has a microphone. He's going to roam around, and we can start with Krish, who already has a question, and then we'll go to George next.
Hi. Thanks for a really informative session. I think I came into this room with about 15 questions. I think 14 of them have been answered, so I've got one question left. So my journey to coaching actually came through a process of team coaching, which I didn't know as team coaching at that time. I used to run account planning and account management sessions for a large software company cutting across silos. Even today, the question I always have is what happens after team coaching? And what I mean by that is how do you know it's working? And I think there was reference to the word system. So I just want your, from just a practitioner standpoint, what are some of the best practices you're seeing in putting these systems in place? And when I mean systems, I mean 2 things specifically. One is leading indicators that you know that this is working. one. And the second is the software indicators, which is like the culture, which is the symbols, the rituals, the celebrations that the team is doing so that they remain intact and moving forward.
Great. Before responding, what I'd like to do is actually field a few questions just to make sure we have time for a couple. So why don't we pass the mic around? Let's get 3 or 4 questions and then we'll allow you guys to respond for a bit. We can probably have about 2 rounds of that in the time we have.
Hi, I'm George Johnson. I'm the former CEO of Team Coaching International. What an honor to see all you guys together. You know, when I search Google on the term team coaching, it comes up with about 9,000 impressions a month. And the question that I'm sitting with is this the right term? Is there a better term to explain the work that we do? Or is it just new and it needs to grow over time?
Yeah, behind, maybe pass behind you there, yeah.
I'll come in order.
You guys are hearing these questions okay? The panelists? Okay, good. Let's just take 2 more questions, then we'll let you guys respond.
Hi, my name is Jeremy Robinson. I've been a coach since 1980s. I have to say this discussion is both inspiring and very confusing to me because it does remind me of where the world of coaching was at around the mid-90s. I find less agreement about stuff and more instances of certain practices than I do find agreement. For instance, what's the difference between a group and a team? When does a group become a team? Who's the client in group coaching or team coaching? Then, you know, so there's, and then the issues around supervision and training and making oneself obsolete are important also, but it seems like there's so much inspiration about the energy of having this discussion that we've missed some fundamentals that need to be explored in very specific detail. Thank you.
Okay, let's just take 1 more question, then we can open up the panelists to respond.
Hi, I'm Shiva Ronan, and my question actually is not related, somewhat related, but it's more about the process. Given Jeremy's very thoughtful observation, understanding the complexity of team coaching confirmed my hypothesis that when I'm brought in as an executive coach to help my clients in their teams, that I don't know enough. It was mentioned that there's a lot of, many of you are doing or teaching team coaching. So once we answer all the content-related questions, I would love to hear a little bit, like a short description of the programs that you are providing to help us know more about this complex topic. Thank you.
On that one, we have podcast interviews with each one of these and show notes that have their programs. So I think rather than spend time here, I think you can get that, but you're going to find great resources around training and team coaching from each one of the panelists. So anyone want to respond? We're going to kind of just open it up. You can respond to whichever question you feel compelled to. And if we've satisfied fully, wonderful. If we don't, hopefully leave you a little hungry is a good thing. So can't boil the ocean, I like to say. So anyone want to jump in and respond to any of these great questions that have been posed?
I just jump in on, go.
David?
Go ahead.
You were jumping in?
Right. And then David. Just briefly, the question about how do we know it's working is a brilliant question. Every organization wants an answer to that before they start the process. And there are a couple of ways to address that question. In our work, we use the TCI, Team Diagnostic Assessment, at the beginning of an engagement with a team as a way to give them measures around 14 team effectiveness factors so that after the end of that coaching engagement, they can do a second assessment and measure how they improved over time in those measures. Measures like the ability of the team to create effective goals and strategies around trust or communication and so forth. So that's one way. But really what organizations want to know, in my experience, is they want to know, based on this investment, what's the outcome? And I think there's a lot of work yet to be done to actually establish even guidelines on how we measure the improvement. One of the simple ways team coaches can do that is by, at the beginning of the work with the team, have the team decide what will be a measure of success for this team for this period of time, based on what we're responsible for as a team, how the organization expects us to perform. What could we be measuring? And again, I want to say it's not so much, as a team coach, it's not so much about what they are measuring or even what the outcome is. It's the process that they engage while they are working on whatever it is they decide they want to work on.
Right.
In the same way that I know my experience with individual clients is less about the goals they declare and reach as it is about what they learn along the way. And I think that's true with teams.
Great, thank you.
Can I build on that, Phil? Because I absolutely agree that having a 360 degree, which is on feedback, which is on the team at the beginning and one that's on the end, is a good starting place. And I think it's good to ask them about their degree of what they would see as success, but I don't think that's sufficient. Because for me, there's been a danger that people think that being a high-performing team is being able to tick a whole series of boxes. And ultimately, I think where we have to get to is to realize that the outcome is the team creating more value for all its stakeholder groupings. And we need to use value creation for stakeholders as the outcome measure as opposed to the outputs measure for team coaching. And I just wanted to link that to agree with the second questioner that yes, I think we are where individual coaching was 30 years ago. We are still in the place of different models emerging, different trainings emerging, and then having to create some degree of integration across them. And I think what David said earlier is that that's a creative space. That is a period we have to go through. And I think what Krista's doing and Sandra bringing together the different innovators is a process we're having to go to. But we shouldn't try and tie it down too soon.
Yeah.
And the third link would be to the question about, well, who is the client? Right? Because if it's group coaching, you have a series of individual clients within the group. Right. If it's team coaching, the team is the client. If it's systemic team coaching, then the team becomes your partner and the client is the team stakeholders. How do we partner with the team to create greater value for the team stakeholders? And I think that distinction helps us get much clearer about the difference between group coaching, team facilitation, and more systemic team coaching, where we're working alongside and walking the journey with them to raise the impact they can have and the value they can create for their whole range of complex stakeholders. So that's just trying to tie the three questions together.
Yeah,
I think there are three layers. This issue of how do we measure it, how do we know it's working? I think there are three layers to this, and the expected thing, I don't think, which is we've achieved some kind of goal that we set. I don't think that's realistic in most cases. I think that what that leads to is simplistic coaching. Maybe that's something that you can get, but the real benefit I think comes out of three things. One is the raised self-awareness of the team. How do they understand themselves and their interactions and the systems that are going on within that team and outside the team? So it's that awareness of what's actually happening, how things work and don't work, their strengths and their weaknesses, their values, their identity, and what's the team narrative? All of those things, I think, are outputs that should come from effective team coaching. So that's the first level. The second level is what actually changes in behaviors and the processes and things that they do. And the third level is what is the capability? What capacity has this team now created for itself in order to do things differently and to grow in the future? So for me, those are three better ways of measuring progress. And to focus on those at the beginning so that they recognize that this is what they should be looking for and taking note of. Because if you feel that you grow as a team, then you can begin to do it more consciously. I'd just like to comment, just to finish on this issue, on the issue of the complexity of team coaching. I would always say, when I'm training team coaches, I would always make the point, every set team coaching conversation that you have or session that you have is an experiment, and that you contract with the team, that they will be experimenting with you. And so the complexity is something that you manage together and use as part of that experiment.
So, David, I like the language of complexity, and Peter, going back to what you said, I like giving it some distinctions around who the client really is. And one of the things that I think is inherent in coaching is that we help people find language. And so simplifying in a world that is chaotic, is full of challenges, is full of change, I think is really critical. So, based on the teams that I managed before, I became a coach, and then all the partnerships we've had since, it's like, if we can help the team look at something that is really meaningful to them and put it in the form of a thematic goal or stretch goal. For example, I had a vaccines team in a pharmaceutical company who looked at something aspirational. Their goal was to eradicate a disease state for which they had a therapy. But they had to come to that as a team. And what we've done is we've been able to look at letting the team foster the conversation and further advance it so that they take full ownership of that. And then when you look at the objectives and the strategic drivers that achieve that aspirational goal and have it time bound, so within 2 years, find a therapy within 2 years, is what a coach can help bring to the table, which is the use of our process of coaching, leaving people in action, but also having them put their head around that, and then the coaches get to do the real work, which is to come in and observe the behaviors and teach them to observe the behaviors. So for me, it's taking the complex and making it simple enough for people to get their hands around it in a world where there's not a lot of bandwidth and there's a lot of noise. So, and Jeremy, I love your statement and your observation, because I think it's true. We bumped up against calling it something else, and we always come back to coaching.
Yeah. So I'm gonna jump in as a practitioner mainly and a writer. I'm not a researcher, but I think as practitioners, we've heard it from DJ, we've seen it from Peter in the chat. It really is about simplicity. The complexity in this is the people we're working with. We always need to come back to our coaching approaches, our coaching competencies, our coaching skills. Even though the competencies may look and feel a little bit different in the team coaching realm and group coaching realm, we need to lead from what we know and really simplicity, embrace the chaos, because we just don't know what is coming. That is very important as a stance as a practitioner. And again, trust your client. We don't need to know the answers, right? That is not the coaching stance. We're not a consultant. We're there to experiment, explore, discover with the clients that we're working with. So I think it's been a fascinating, and no doubt, just like anything in emergence, a very dynamic conversation this morning amongst everyone.
The only piece that I want to add to this, and I agree with so much that's being said, is that in answer to the question, who is the client? For us, when we're looking at team coaching, it literally is. We're saying that the team itself is the client rather than the individuals within it. So often it feels like we still continue to work with the individual players, and you can't exactly avoid that, but we actually want to know what is it that entity that is the team or the system itself, what does it want? So we literally, from time to time, there was during the recession when there were so many layoffs, this one company that we work with, where we went through the whole process of who needs to be laid off, what are the things that they're using, what are the processes, and as we worked with them, towards the end of the first day that we worked with them, we pulled them together and had them independently step into a seat and says, what does this company want in terms of the company itself, the team itself? What does it say about layoffs? What does it want? And they came up with a completely different set of answers and responses that really came from a very different place from the individual conversation. So for us, there always is, everything that we do is working in that direction of how does team members get access to experience information that is beyond the individual input. that is the team itself. So we hold that the team itself actually is the client.
Great.
Nice.
So colleagues, we have come to the end of our time for this panel discussion. I know there was much more questions in the audience that we could address, but again, hopefully leaving you a little hungry is good for future motivation to continue the dialogue beyond this session. So I want to thank all the audience members for coming today, for taking part in this conversation. This theme of the Columbia Conference, again, is on the future of coaching. And again, teams are a fundamental unit through which groups and organizations get work done, and actually has become, to borrow Amy Edmondson's term, teams are organizations' form of learning. That organizational learning happens through teams and teaming. And so teams aren't going away. I think this is a rich area. I think Jennifer's comment around we need to be comfortable embracing the chaos or embracing the complexity is part of it, because it's not going away, right? And our panelists today, David Clutterbuck in Istanbul, Phil Sandhal in San Francisco, Marita Fridjhon in San Francisco, Jennifer Britton in Toronto, Ruth Wageman up in New Hampshire, DJ Mitsch in North Carolina, and Peter Hawkins over in the UK really gave us a great treat today to really dive into a challenging and dynamic topic. So let's give a big round of applause to the pioneers in team coaching for today's session.